Welcome to this webinar organized by the Argentinian CONICET Regional Hub of My Climate Risk. I'm Camila Prudente, a PhD student in atmospheric sciences, and I'll be moderating this webinar. I'm joined by Julieta Caneva, a PhD candidate in anthropology, both of us from the Argentina's National Scientific and Technical Research Council, or CONICET. For those who are not familiar with My Climate Risk, this is one of the lighthouse activities of the World Climate Research Program. This aims to develop and integrate into climate science a bottom-up approach to regional climate risk, starting from the context and scale of decision and allowing the introduction of relevant climate information into that context. My Climate Risk is organized as a network of hubs, that is communities of practice that each work in their specific context, but that share knowledge and resources to advance towards the same goal. At this moment, there are 20 hubs worldwide. Until last year, we were the only hub in South America, but a new one was recently added. We want to encourage you to join this activity, particularly in the Global South. In the case of the Argentina Hub, we are a team of 18 students, teachers, and researchers from different disciplines who work to build knowledge relevant to society. Since 2021, we have been meeting regularly to develop our common understanding as an interdisciplinary team of what we understand as the main concepts of the My Climate Risk activity. Julieta.
Okay, thank you. Hello, welcome. My name is Julieta Caneva. In this opportunity, the webinar is titled Climate Storylines as a Tool for Interdisciplinary Dialogue on Risk Decision Making, Analyzing a Severe Drought in Southeastern South America. This topic will be presented by two speakers. On one hand, we have Florencia Fossa Riglos. She is a PhD candidate in social anthropology at the Interdisciplinary School of Advanced Social Studies of the National University of San Martin in Argentina. She's in the final stage prior to the submission of her dissertation. She holds a licentiate and professorship in anthropological sciences with a sociocultural orientation diploma from the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters at the University of Buenos Aires. She is currently a researcher at Rural Studies and Globalization Program, and since 2008, she has participated as a researcher in international, interdisciplinary, and intersectoral research projects related to climate change, sustainability, and knowledge co-production across Europe and South America, conducting ethnographic fieldwork on the agriculture and scientific sectors in Argentina. Her research focuses on the social impacts of climate change and adaptation strategies, specifically addressing the role of expert knowledge and its social appropriation processes, its influence on public policy, models of development and sustainability, and the epistemological and social conditions that facilitate knowledge co-production processes and interdisciplinary research methodologies. She co-chairs the Argentinian CONICET Hub of My Climate Risk and is a part of the social sciences team. On the other hand, we have Leandro Díaz. He's an assistant researcher of the CONICET at the Research Center for the Sea and the Atmosphere of the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. He holds PhD and diploma degrees from the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences of the Faculty of Exact and Natural Sciences of the University of Buenos Aires, where he is currently adjunct professor. He is also a researcher at the French-Argentinian Institute for the Study of Climate and its Impacts, IFAECI. His research focuses on climate variability, prediction, and change in South America at interannual and decadal timescales. He is co-director of the Dynamics of Atmospheric Variability on South America, DIVAR, group at CIMA-UBA-CONICET-IFAECI. He's an active member of the Argentinian CONICET Hub of My Climate Risk and also of the Explaining and Predicting Earth System Change Lighthouse activity, where he co-leads the working group called Identifying the Forced Response of the Southern Hemispheric Atmospheric Circulation to Greenhouse Gases, Aerosols, and Ozone, and Associated Surface Impacts on Extremes of the LIDAR, large ensembles for attribution of dynamically driven extremes activity. So before giving them the floor, I remind you that please leave your questions for the speakers in the Q&A section, because the chat is only for technical issues. So now, Florencia and Leandro, it is your turn.
Okay, let me share the... Okay, is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, hello, everyone. I'd like to thank WCRP for their support to make this webinar possible, especially Narel, Meza, Hindu, and Carlos, and also the MCR Argentina Hub for helping us with the dissemination and the moderation of the webinar, and of course, all the audience that is joining us today. In this presentation that we will share with you today is actually based on an interdisciplinary dialogue, as the title states, that we carried out together with a group of 8 researchers that I'd like to name. Besides Leandro and I, they are Valeria Hernandez, Ana Sorenson, Marisol Osman, Juan Rivera, Federico Robledo, and Camila Prudente. All of us from 6 different institutions in South America and Europe that you can see here in the slide, their logos. The Institute of Research for Development from France, the Program of Rural Studies and Globalization from National University of San Martin, Argentina, the Sea and Atmosphere Research Center, CONICET-UBA, the French-Argentine Institute for the Study of Climate and its Impacts, the Argentine Institute of Nivology, Glaciology, and Environmental Sciences, and the Department of Atmospheric and Ocean Sciences from the Faculty of Exact and Natural Sciences at University of Buenos Aires. Elaborating and publishing this work has been definitely a long and winding road, so we're very happy to be sharing this work with you today. Our first meeting to brainstorm began in 2021, and the article is finally available online since the past August. So we're really glad to share this with you. The work approaches the storylines about a drought event that took place in southeastern South America, and concretely in Argentina, during 2008-2009. From an interdisciplinary dialogue between climatologists and anthropologists. But why the storylines, right? I mean, why did we choose to work specifically with climate storylines? First, there's a growing interest in them, since storylines could be a tool to bridge the existing gap between scientific knowledge and adaptive social action. On one hand, there's a strong consensus on the relevance of narratives and storytelling in the processes of constructing social meanings, as well as in the way the problems are approached and decisions are made. But also for climate science specifically, storylines are also a tool that is used both for the study of extreme events and their attribution or non-attribution to the phenomenon of climate change, as well as for representing the uncertainty that is associated with physical aspects of climate change and decision-making. So the study of climate storylines aim to achieve, on one side, a more robust understanding of climate events and the responses adopted locally. And by robust, we mean specifically not restricted to physical aspects, but considering socioeconomic and political aspects too. And on the other, but very complementary side, the study of storylines aims to produce socially relevant climatic information for realistic climate risk decision-making contexts. So because of all of this, we decided to dive in on this tool. And when the first thing that came was that there are there's a lot of different approaches and also meanings when it comes to storylines. The first thing that is notable is the difference in the literature, particularly in the social sciences and physical climate sciences literature. We're not going to detail all the approaches here, but we do have included all the references of great works that summarize and analyze detail these differences in the introduction. But undoubtedly, the biggest difference amongst social science and climate science literature is the centrality of either the use of the storyline concept or the narrative concepts. We also have to mention that considering decision-making context, on one hand, physical climate storylines tend to have little interaction with stakeholder integration with the socioeconomic and political components. Scenario-based approaches, which are generally more interdisciplinary, and discourse analytical approaches sometimes do not consider the specific social configuration in which those storylines or narratives are embedded. And a fourth alternative approach, which are socio-anthropological narrative analyses, do addresses these two dimensions, that is, the socioeconomic, political components and the social context, but definitely misses the physical context. So considering our own disciplinary backgrounds, we decided to work with two specific approaches that are physical climate science storylines and socio-anthropological narrative analysis, to explore the asymmetries between the disciplines, the communication barriers between scientists and non-scientists, and towards the need to integrate non-climate and climate-related hazards to describe risk, which are often highlighted as the main challenges that still need to be overcome. So let's take a closer look at some of the differences between these two approaches. Leandro will help me to better present this slide because the idea is to share with you the specificities of each disciplinary approach. So I will give the word to Leandro.
Well, hi everyone. So in the first place, I want to introduce the physical climate storylines. They takes the conception of storyline from the political science and behavioral psychology, and we could define them, or they focus on the argumentative dimension, what the story says of the physical phenomena under study, to identify the logic of their premises and conclusions. They aim to represent uncertainty in the physical domain of climate change to improve the communication of climate knowledge to decision makers. They have been used, as Florencia said before, to attribute events to different causal factors, as well for exploring the unfolding of events in future climates, for constructing and communicating regional climate information. They have been claimed to have the potential to provide a vehicle for crossing disciplinary or social boundaries, which is essential to meaning making due to their storytelling or narrative element. In that sense, we could say that they are proposed as a tool to reach a common vision that enables decision makers to understand climate change and extreme events, risks for human and natural ecosystems. And also two important concepts that they have behind is the one of the causality that in the physical climate storylines are understood as the physically self-consistent unfolding of past events based on Sheffer et al. Work. And considering the attribution, they understand the attribution of the events based on multivariate, meaning that depends on more than one variable, and a deterministic, understanding that as a non-probabilistic approach, representation of climate information. So now Florencia will present the other approach and the main differences between them.
Thanks, Leon. So as Leon was saying, contrasting to this view, the social anthropological narrative approaches take their conceptions of narrative and storyline from social anthropology, sociolinguistic, and hermeneutic philosophy, which actually are all part of what in social sciences is known as the narrative theory. These are called narratives because for social sciences, when we talk about the story only exists by being told or narrated. And narratives are specifically defined as perspective-based stories, that means that they're not neutral, that articulate past events that can be experienced by the narrator or not in a chronological and casual sequence, that's specifically a storyline, the logical, chronological, and casual sequence. But this storyline threads a plot of actors and actions, which is never arbitrary, but selective and meaningful for listeners within a social configuration. So, since narratives are always selective, social context is therefore not an epiphenomenon of the story, but it is the very frame that shapes the storyline selection, making it meaningful and relevant for individual and collective action. Moreover, paraphrasing Austin, stories matter not just because of what they say, but also because of what they do. That is what we call their performative capacity, the ability to influence reality and social action. They can institute values, establish legitimate and non-legitimate social relations of powers, and questions or reinforce the established order. So the efficiency of a narrative is not uniform from one community to another, and this implies bringing to the fore the polyphony, which is another concept of the narrative theory that relates to the plurality and the counterpoints of stories. This entails that we need to take a closer look to power relations in the process of creating narratives, and it entails showing how multiple stories and the storylines they uphold are socially grounded. Okay, and of course, their context of enunciation. This includes who narrates, for whom it is narrated a storyline, when, where, and what they narrate and what they do not, and to which audiences they are addressed, as well as their effects on concrete social practices of decision-making. Thus, when it comes to the attributions of casualty and the attributions of the concept attribution itself, establishing attributions and causes, the difference arises because the selective and situated nature of narratives is fundamental in order to be able to effectively produce meaning, because it depends on them to achieve its performance capacity. But when it comes to the attribution this causality establishes, this involves disputes and negotiation, because they establish responsibilities, and thus they delimit possible horizons of actions that reveal the structures, the social structures themselves and their power relations. Leandro?
Yes, so, this is our approach in this study. To start, we have decided to use an interdisciplinary methodology that is based on the work of Hernandez and co-authors. This interdisciplinary approach seeks to explain the complexity of a phenomenon by putting theoretical and methodological frameworks from different disciplines in dialogue. So for that, we start from the academic and disciplinary expertise of the 8 anthropologists and climatologists that are part of the group of the study. Most of us have been trained and developed our research careers in institutions of the region and have jointly participated in different climate research projects before and now. So we held monthly meetings for over a year where we compare and discuss the respective definitions and perspectives for approaching the stories, the two kinds of stories, and then reach a consensus on exploring a hybrid interdisciplinary methodology that allow engaging two different lines of evidence, one coming from the physical science and one from the social science, in dialogue and without succumbing to the integration imperative. That is something important for our study. Through the meetings, we start to find the epistemic and communicative differences between these kind of stories. And also we understand better the scope and limitations of each approach, and also the limitation of our group. Among these limitations, we could mention that not all authors were involved in researching the event at the time it occurred. Only anthropologists interacted with stakeholders at the time of the event, and also, well, the event was selected because of the event that was selected because of the ethnographic fieldwork carried out during the event occurred more than 1 decade before the elaboration of this work. So, next, please. So, which was the event that we decided to study? We focused on a drought event that occurred in 2008, between 2008 and 9, in the northeast of Argentina. This event was very important because the country's economy was severely impacted by this drought. It's estimated that has cost 2.1% of the national GDP and around 11% of the total export for the year, with the soybeans being the most affected crop. In particular, we chose the San Justo department because this was the place where the ethnographic fieldwork was carried out by the anthropologists of our group. It's also very relevant in terms of the physical climate part, because this event was unprecedented since the 1935, and it was not only we don't only have rainfall deficit, we also have this rainfall deficit led to agricultural and hydrological drought conditions for almost more than 1 year of the duration of the event. I want also to remark that this region has in the last decades have an expansion of the agricultural frontier following the adoption of transgenic crops and their associated biotechnological packages on land previously used for livestock, and even on land close to floodable areas. And in particular, in San Justo region, the agriculture is mainly of soybean, which extend over 73% of the department's productive area. And so it's very important in the structuration of the social organization, and in the most impact productions for the drought was the agricultural yields, as well as dairy production that affects diverse production profiles in different ways. Next slide, please. So the data that we use in the first place is a different kind of data that we had to use in these two kinds of stories that we are studying. In the case of the physical climate storylines, we use data that was obtained from observations, in situ observations, satellite estimate, analysis, and several climate variability mode and indices. In this case, we don't use climate simulations, but in the case of the social anthropological narrative analysis, data that was used, as I said before, was collected through an ethnographic fieldwork conducted by the two of the authors that are the anthropologists in the San Justo department during the time of the drought and the following years. This fieldwork included 12-month stay in the study area of Florencia in 2009 and followed by 1-month visits in the following years. This ethnographic fieldwork enabled the anthropological team to get acquainted with the different dimensions of everyday life, generate records of productive, policy, and social cultural activities, as well as have interviews with different local actors, including producers, representatives from institutions, civil organizations, government decision makers. And also they have different thematic participation workshops that include sectors of the San Justo community around these years of the ethnographic fieldwork, and where they address the climate-society relationship. So next slide, please. So in the first place, I present the physical climatic storylines of this event that was based on the climatological. Is the drought storyline from what we call the climatological perspective. To construct it, we made an assessment of the event based on the advance of the understanding of the climate variability and change in South America that we synthesized in this causal network. That is one of the ways that physical climate layers used to the visual ways of communication. Here we indicate the major physical drivers that explain the observed impacts based on the available data and no relation from the climate literature. So we focus on evaluating the influence of well-known patterns of climate variability, such as La Niña or other modes that have influence on regional circulation, as well as anthropogenic factors identified in the literature that could interact with the natural variability of rainfall and modify the response of the local and regional water cycles. So to summarize from the analysis, we conclude that the regional drought has been mostly explained by natural variability, mainly La Niña, and other low-frequency variability modes, modulation in regional impact, such as the Pacific decadal oscillation or the southern annual mode, that led to the conditions, to the circulation, regional circulation conditions that enhance the drought conditions. But this natural variability could be partly influenced by human activities at global scale, such as with the greenhouse gases increases and stratospheric ozone depletion that modify in some way some of these natural patterns of variability. Also about the remote scales, for example, mechanisms like the Amazonian deforestation, and also through the local scales related to change of local land use and water channels. In the case of the remote and local case, the evidence in the literature is lower, so we don't have the same confidence that for the other factors that we have considered. Next slide. Your turn.
Okay, and on the other side, when it came to how social anthropological narrative analysis, what could we find through this analysis? We identified 3 different types of narratives. But before we move on to that, Leandro has already mentioned all the fieldwork context. I wanted to share with you some pictures so you can actually have a graphical image of who are these stakeholders, what is this place, San Justo. So the narratives we identified were based on a hermeneutical theoretical framework that necessarily puts these subjects and their social structures on the foreground. And on the basis of all the ethnographic materials, what we found was that each of the accounts, each of these three storylines that we found, their meaning varied radically according to the structural positions of each actors in relation to the local hegemonic production model, which, as was mentioned, is intensive agriculture of genetically modified soy for export to the global markets. So an important thing about a social context of this climatic event was that the drought occurred in a context in which, due to the increase of the price of the soybean crops, which at that moment reached over $600 per ton on Chicago market, the national government at that time decided to change its tax policy in order to be able to capture this extraordinary income, which was really important for the economy. But this generated a revolt in the agricultural sector at the whole national level that resulted in street protests, road blockings that led to the government to backtrack on that proposal. You can see at the right side of the slide some of the pictures of those protests, which were very great protests. And apart from this conflict, which definitely crossed all the drought storylines, the context was aggravated by the middle of the drought event because there was an end in the upward cycle on the international price of soybean due to the global financial crisis of 2008. So the complex was quite complex, and to add an extra variable, the increase of concerns, both at the international but also the local level, related the environmental consequences of GM crops, was also tensing these contexts more and more. Thus, the drought was definitely not told in the same way by all social actors. Farmers on one side, policymakers and ecological activists, which you can see also at the inferior right corner, a picture of one of the assemblies, had three different storylines, all of the same climatic events that I will detail in the next slide. Not way into much detail because otherwise it will be complicated. But what I want to highlight is that these three different types of storyline is characterized by a specific argumentative structure that links causes, attributions, and possible action paths, as you can see in the table that summarizes them here. This is particularly evident in the attribution of causalities that establish or conceal responsibilities and consequently affect the potential horizons of actions that each storyline promotes. While the storylines of farmers and policymakers hold each other responsible for the impacts of this drought and propose basically technocratic actions that had either taxes or subsidies that are based on top-to-down approaches, the storylines of the environmentalists call for a more participatory political action and actually questions the capitalist model of production and consumption from a broader perspective that is aware of the current situation of global environmental crisis, and in particular, they question the role of agribusiness model farming on it. So, as I was mentioning, the very important thing is that we see through these storylines the social structure. We don't only see the drought impacts, but why those impacts are impacting differently to different actors. You have also, well, I added some of the pictures, so you can see here the pictures on the right side. The first two ones are correspond to a round table of agricultural producers that they created in order to demand those taxes, exemptions, and subsidies to the states. Then you have the third picture. Okay, I'll use here the indicator. This picture is a reunion between policy representatives and farmers in order to get to an agreement of that. And well, eventually it ended up, as we explained, with the political responsible actors taking the side of the most affected, the most vulnerable product producers, which were the small dairy producers and the small agricultures, and also the beekeepers. I think I can't recall the word in English to bee production. And last but not least, the two last pictures are also from assemblies of the environmental activists. The next thing we did after what Leandro showed here, which was the very thorough analysis of the climatological physical climate storylines and the socio-anthropological narrative analysis, then the following step was actually to confront them. And when we start comparing them, what we realized was that well, first of all, we had very disciplinary argumentative structures that are actually related to the theoretical framework. Each one of us each team was actually managing, as I mentioned, a hermeneutic framework on one side and a systemic framework on the other. But also, a very remarkable thing was the difference between reaching one specific storyline and the identification of three different storylines. So polyphony was coming all over. Another thing that appeared was once and again, the social power relations became evident and the role of agribusiness model, but also the importance of political decision-making process and the role of political knowledge. This revealed as a very important thing because it made us aware of our scientific knowledge gaps in two different ways. On one side, because when we started exploring these silences and gaps between these two approaches, we became aware that the climatological storylines considers human activities more in the abstract, leaving the concrete subjects on a second place, and of course their social structure. So these conditions the way we can think of the possible horizons of actions and decision making. But from the socio-anthropological analysis of the narrative, we realized that if we don't pay enough attention to political decision making process and the role of the specific political knowledge, we underscore the relevance of the effective policy that actually took place, because despite the significance of soybean cultivation in the region, the economic inequality and the scarcity of the resources that they managed resulted in the subsidization of small livestock and agricultural producers, because they were, of course, more vulnerable. So we really need to understand that even though the most important activity in terms of revenue is soybean, the most vulnerable were the small producers, and those were the ones that were eventually helped. So this is not a casualty, and it has to do with this political knowledge. Last but not least, considering the potential dialogue between the different storylines, we also found that the environmentalist storylines is closer to the horizon of meaning that concerns global environmental change researchers. However, they both understand the meaning of attribution in very different ways. We will go deeper on this on the next slide, but I want to highlight now that while the arguments that the environmentalist actors point as the most relevant for explaining this drought actually do not have enough evidence from the scientific, do not have enough support from the current scientific evidence. So let me go back so you can see it here. Paradoxically, the factors, as I mentioned, are for the environmentalists, deforestation, private channeling, and agrochemical pollution are the ones you can see it here on the pointed lines that do not have, or at least have limited scientific evidence. This doesn't mean that that we must minimize the role of anthropogenic factors in the development of the drought. But in fact, there's according to our research, we cannot highlight a causal link, a very strong causal link. So such divergency is exposing a gap in our scientific knowledge by the climatological community in connection of factors that have major sociopolitical relevance to decision making. So confronting these two different frameworks actually make us be aware again of the gaps and silences, but also the potentialities that each approach has. And this was key for the discussion moments where I would like to share some of these points. Well, the first one was realizing that there are actually very few interdisciplinary approaches that in fact contrast the way in which two different disciplines work without forcing an integration on one methodology and one theoretical framework. And this was really important because it made us see the gaps. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to make this. On one side, if we focus only on physical cause-effect relationship, again, we are able on one side to draw a conditional hypothesis in the face of future drought events, but we are still far from the decision-making context, the real, like the everyday decision-making context. But on the other side, if we only focus on the socio-anthropological analysis, focusing on the actors and their context, but we leave out or we miss the physical parts, we run the risk of falling in or reinforcing situations of epistemic injustice, because eventually the claims of the environmental activists on the impacts of agribusiness model were disdained precisely because of the lack of scientific evidence. And even if it was, we also need to remain critical because there's an extra risk which has to do with uncritically reproducing the arguments in favor of the environmentalization of economic and political problems of capitalism. So this confronted us with the limits of our respective disciplinary and scientific knowledge, and also the limits we all shared regarding the transformation of sociopolitical order factors. So recognizing all these limits and the difference between the approaches was really key, because they certainly do condition the type of analysis we produce, and consequently the questions and the answers that we create for further research, further approach, and to imagine new tools and solutions. So a second point of discussion relates to a key difference we found on the casualty and attribution concepts. On one hand, from the climatological perspective, the storyline has a conditional framework that considers the relevant factors that could cause the event, how climate change contributed to those causal factors, and how a future similar event can have a greater impact under a continued climate change scenario. On the other hand, from the anthropological perspective, the causality attributions imply responsibility or accountability. They actually involve disputes and negotiations, and they delimit possible action horizons that are talking to us about the social structures and the power relations that are engaged. So the significance and the social relevance of different climate narratives and the storylines each support are crossed by social structural dimensions. Last but not least, we also found that, well, we wanted to share some lessons for the future that arose from this discussion. The first one is that it is not enough to monitor the hazard, but it is very important and necessary to monitor the impact, particularly when interacting with real decision-making scenarios, because climate-related hazard are the description of these risks in order to contribute to policymaker needs us to integrate climate and non-climate related hazards. If we focus only on the possible occurrence of the future events, regardless of the concrete historicity and social structures, we fail to see the differential impacts of climate events and the inequalities at stake by human-induced factors. And on the other way around, we need to take this into account for public policies and the democratization of the debate around sustainable development goals and the various transition agendas. Last but not least, enhancing our comprehensions of past climate events and their implications serves as an input to inform future climate services and impact-based forecasts. And to finish, some reflections we wanted to share today with you. I want to highlight the first one is that staying close to the performance capacity of narratives can help the interdisciplinary goal of pluralizing climate knowledge and practices and lead to more just climate action by questioning the dominant agendas and exploring the marginalized ones. And second, communities are not a homogeneous whole. So considering drought storylines as part of an agonistic socioclimatic field implies recognizing both this plurality and situated nature of the stories, the way they're structured according to their social context of the new situation, but also the disputes and contradictions that arise among them, as well as their potential impact in terms of the necessary transformation towards a truly environmentally sustainable and socially just horizon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florencia and Leandro, for this presentation. We are opening the Q&A section. If you have any question, you can put in the Q&A box. So, Julieta, do you have any question on, or I have the first? Okay, we have two questions. So the first one from Ted Shepard is what sort of reaction did you get from the reviewers of your paper? Do you want to start, Florencia?
Okay, thanks a lot, Ted, for this question. Well, we had, there's always reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, but we definitely learned a lot through the reviewing and publication process. As I mentioned, it was a long and winding road. We originally submitted this paper to other journal. The editor thought this was publishable, but that they didn't fit the scope. So we had to rewrite the whole thing and adapt it to the this journal, which certainly it was accurate. It was a much better fit for our findings. So thank you so much for that, editor. And when we started the second reviewing process, it was really, for us, it was evident when one of the reviewers was from the social sciences or from the physical sciences because of the questions they were asking. So eventually, it's like we all started like to speak this interdisciplinary language because we had two reviewing instances, and they were very enriching because that their comments forced us to explicit our arguments, and that I think by doing that, then both the reviewer we imagine comes from the physical sciences, but also the other reviewer that we suspect it was from the social sciences, they both came to an agreement that this was publishable. So it was definitely a trip.
Okay, we have another question. I think these two are linked. Jose Alberto asks, how did you or how will you approach the communities to ensure their engagement with the process?
Well, I'm sorry, Leon, I will take this one too, but because it has to do with the anthropological field work. Well, it's a very interesting question because when I originally arrived at San Justo in January 2009, this was the beginning of the drought event, and well, I arrived there in the frame of a climate change project that was called Claris LPV. So considering this very tense political situation, the fact that I came representing an academic project allowed a different kind of bond, because I was not seen as a threat, because it was a really socially tense moment. On one side, the ecological activists were the first ones that were interested in getting into a conversation with me and about the subject of climate and the drought related to climate change. But to my surprise, the farmers, which, as we mentioned in the work, are very different productive profiles, but all of them were interested considering the impact of the drought in their own productions. So actually it was a very good reception, but the implication, their engagement in the long term, had also to do with the fact that ethnographic fieldwork requires for you to do a long staying there. I actually lived there for a year. So we were basically interacting in a daily, day-by-day basis. We shared, we saw each other in different farming events. They invited me to their lands to show me how they produce, what their problems were, specifically related to the drought impacts. So that's how we made it, basically, guaranteeing that there was a space for dialogue and mutual listening.
Okay, well, the next one is related to the last question, but if you want say anything else, Florencia, I share you. And William Gutowski asked, how would you propose developing trust by marginalized communities who may question your motives and level of interest in actually helping them? Do you want to add something?
Yes, it's a very interesting question, William. Thank you very much for posing this question, because it is indeed a very important subject. Marginalized communities, in this case, were specifically the environmentalists, who were seen as fundamentalists. They were the ones whose arguments were totally discarded. And at the beginning, they also were, we all actors, nobody is ready for an anthropological presence. We know it very well. We come to a territory and nobody knows who's an anthropologist, why is it there, why do we want to talk with them? But eventually, if you take the time, and of course you are willing to have a non-instrumental conversation, then temporality and of course dialogue allows you to create trust bonds. However, this question that you made is important because even though, the social tensions are everywhere, and scientifics are also crossed by these social structural tensions. So when agribusiness profile farmers saw me talking in the town with or going to an event or an assembly of the environmentalists, they immediately confronted me with, okay, why are you talking to those people? And vice versa. Well, you going to that farming exposition? So that's where I think we as academics can make the difference, because we can create a space for social dialogue that is not that is specific, that has to do with knowledge production, and is not it's a different place, the place from a researcher right? So I wasn't seeing, eventually they understood that I really wanted to understand, that I was trying to understand the process and understand them. And I wasn't going to be like a double agent, because these suspicions were present in all the actors, the small ones, the middle-sized ones, and this is going to happen in every social field we explore. So
And thank you, Florencia. Now we have one question to Leandro, I think. Santiago Núñez Mejía asked, could you use these storylines and both approaches, PCS and SAN, to convey the message of future scenarios and incorporate them into CC projections?
Well, thanks, Santiago, for the question. Well, nowadays the physical climate storylines are being used to address the problem of how to communicate the future scenarios, and I think that we have to make efforts that to also to combine them in some way with what we have learned about what social anthropological narratives could add to the conversation, because if because we could try to because we could create a message that could not only consider the physical aspects of the future, but also the social problems, the social dimension, the power relation, and how the same hazards could be related to different impacts in each of the groups. So I think that this challenge it's not easy to say how we have to make that, but we have to, I think that if we want that our creation of information for the future is going to be useful and also that could be transformative, not only considering how to address the hazard by a physical perspective, but also how the social groups could add to that hazard. We have to take into account these two perspectives and make to address this what we call the polyphony of storyline that are in the real world. They are all of them in the field. So if we only keep one of them and forget of the other, we are not going to consider the whole problem. So, but well, I think that is one of the challenges for us as as scientists for the future.
Thank you. And now I will be reading what will be the last question, because we should be ending the webinar soon. I think Florencia can take this one. It's from Ted Shepard. The question is, how did the stakeholders react to the storylines from different stakeholders? Did it help raise awareness of different perspectives, or did it lead to conflict?
Thanks again, Ted. Yeah, this is also a very interesting question. Well, actually, all of them reacted saying that the other storylines was fake, because that's what we mean when we mean dispute. Regarding the awareness of the different perspective, or if it lead to conflict, I must say we need to keep in mind this was 2008, 2009, which was like 10 years ago. So probably, yeah, I mean, I'm doing futurology now, but I'm sure that today perhaps the situation could be slightly different. Back then, when we talked about climate change, was imagine this is at Santa Fe 2008, 2009. This was talking about like by Star Wars. It was but I'd like to share an example, a concrete example. When after that first fieldwork year, the first year of fieldwork, we did the first climate society workshop. We invited all the social actors that I had interacted with, and to my surprise, to my sad surprise, at first I thought it was a complete failure because none of the middle-sized and corporative stakeholders showed up. Only small farmers and environmentalists, and only one political authority came to the workshop, but not the most important. It was like a secondary figure. So, well, we did this workshop. We had proposed, the activity we proposed was actually based on this drought because it was very recent event, so we didn't even have to appeal to memory. And what happened was that once again they started defending, or they engaged their own attributions on the event. But not only on the event, this time they engaged us as scientists. So I remember one of the physical scientists that led the workshop with my thesis director, Valeria Hernandez. Poor guy, he made a wonderful presentation on climate change, but one of the participants, which was the only big stakeholder that showed up, questioned him because he reminded him that Argentina produced soybean for the transgenic soybean for the European market. Back then, Europe was the first buyer of Argentinian soybean. So the level of tension was total because we realized that people was defending themselves from the problematic of climate change, not thinking how can we adapt or how can we creatively think of solutions to deal with risk better. So back then it was really a tense subject. Again, the ones that engaged mostly were the environmentalists and the small-sized farmers because they were genuinely concerned that the climate was changing and that these events were happening more and more often and they weren't aware how to deal with them. But of course, that wasn't the perspective of agribusiness stakeholders, because as mentioned in the paper, they have a completely different way of structuring their production. If there's a drought in Argentina, they move their production to other country or to other region, actually, because they can't do it. So the awareness was limited regarding stakeholders between them. However, from the scientific point of view, our awareness was huge that this was an issue that had to be addressed, and that the question we had to ask ourselves was, what kind of knowledge on climate are we going to produce and for whom? So basically the awareness mostly fell on us. We're still working on those questions today.
Okay, thank you very much all. Thank you very much, Florencia and Leandro, for this interesting work that you share. We conclude this webinar, and this meeting will be recorded and will soon be available on YouTube of WCRP. Thank you for all the participants and the questions. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a nice week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.